I spent $218,000 to close a gate one woman swore she had the right to drive through, and I know how that sounds. Believe me, I do. But standing there that morning, watching Celeste Waverly pound both hands against the steering wheel of her pearl-white Mercedes while my new steel gates sat locked in front of her like the door to Judgment Day, I felt calmer than I had in years. She had been cutting across my land for nearly a decade, smiling through it like theft was just good neighborhood etiquette. And when I finally told her no, she fined me $700 for painting my garden fence the wrong shade of beige. That was the moment I realized this woman did not want compliance. She wanted ownership, not of the road, not even of the neighborhood, but of people. My name is Daniel Mercer, retired highway engineer, widower, and until 3 months ago, the most exciting thing in my life was deciding whether to drink coffee on the back porch or by the creek, which is exactly how I wanted it after 41 years of designing bridges, drainage systems, and roads for people who never noticed them unless they failed. I had bought 18 acres outside a little Tennessee town called Red Hollow, quiet land with old hickory trees, a gravel drive, and a narrow creek that made the kind of sound you do not appreciate until life has beaten enough noise out of you. My wife, Laura, used to say peace was not silence. It was the absence of people demanding things from you. And after she passed, that land felt like the last conversation I still had with her. Then Celeste showed up in a blazer the color of fresh salmon and shoes that had clearly never met honest dirt. She introduced herself as president of the Briar Glen Homeowners Association. Even though my property was not in Briar Glen, had never been in Briar Glen, and existed long before that subdivision, was even a sketch on some developer's lunch napkin. She stood on my porch with a clipboard tucked under one arm and said, "Daniel, we have received complaint about your fencing choices." I looked over at the little wire fence around my tomatoes, the one I built to keep deer from treating my garden like a buffet, and I said, "Ma'am, unless the deer joined your HOA, I think we're fine." She smiled, but not with her eyes. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived saying I owed $700 for non-compliant perimeter material, improper height, and unauthorized earth tone paint visible from a community access corridor. That last phrase stuck in my head, community access corridor, because what she meant was the dirt track behind my barn, the one she and half her board had been using as a shortcut to the highway for years. When I called to tell her my land was private, her voice went cold enough to frost the phone line. She said, "Mr. Mercer, people around here have relied on that route for a long time, and you would be wise not to interfere with established community use." I remember looking out the window at the tire ruts cutting across Laura's old walking path, and something in me went very still. I did not yell. I did not threaten. I just said, "Celeste, I spent my entire adult life reading maps people try to lie about." Then I hung up, drove to the county records office, and started digging. And what I found in those old files did not just prove she was wrong. It handed me the shovel to bury her whole little kingdom. The county records office in Red Hollow smelled like dust, mildew, and bad fluorescent lighting, the kind of place where forgotten divorces and property disputes go to die. But for me, that building felt like a gold mine. I spent 6 straight hours pulling surveys, easement filings, zoning maps, anything connected to Briar Glen Estates or the old farmland around it. And somewhere around my 3rd cup of terrible vending machine coffee, I found a thing that changed everything. Back in 2004, before Briar Glen even existed, the developers had been granted a temporary construction easement across what is now my property. Temporary. That word was stamped across the paperwork 3 different times, like the county attorney already knew some future idiot would try stretching it into forever. The easement allowed trucks and heavy equipment to cross the land during construction for no longer than 18 months, after which the route was legally required to be restored and closed. According to county completion records, the project finished in early 2006, which meant every single person using that trail for the last 8 years had been trespassing, including Celeste, including her HOA board, including the surveyor she threatened me with. I sat there staring at those papers while this weird feeling crept over me. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. You ever realize someone has been bluffing so long they forgot the cards were fake? That was Celeste. She had spent years acting like authority and confidence were the same thing, and nobody around her had pushed back hard enough to expose the difference. But then I found something even better buried in Briar Glen's HOA charter. Article 9, subsection C. The association could lose legal standing if board members knowingly violated property law or used HOA resources to pursue unauthorized claims outside community boundaries. I actually laughed out loud in that quiet records room and earned myself a dirty look from an old woman sorting tax documents nearby, because suddenly the picture became very clear. Celeste had not just been harassing me. She had been using HOA money, HOA authority, and HOA intimidation tactics to protect her own illegal shortcut. And if I played this right, she was about to burn her entire empire to the ground all by herself. On the drive home, I noticed fresh tire tracks crossing the backside of my pasture again. Deep ones. Recent. She had cut through my land while I was literally downtown, proving she had no legal right to be there. I stood by the creek for a long time that evening, listening to the water move over the rocks while the sun dropped behind the trees, and for the first time since Laura died, I heard her voice in my head clear as day. Don't let people mistake your kindness for surrender. Laura had been a school counselor for 30 years. She understood bullies better than anybody I ever knew. And Celeste Waverly was absolutely a bully, the polished suburban kind, the kind that smiles while stealing inches from people because they assume nobody wants the headache of fighting back. Well, I had recently become a retired man with too much time, a pension, and a very personal relationship with stubbornness. 2 days later, I called about the land next to mine. 52 acres wrapping around Briar Glen like a horseshoe, undeveloped timber property with one old gravel access road running straight through the exact shortcut Celeste people had been using. The realtor, a nervous guy named Andy, nearly choked when I told him I wanted to make an offer immediately. He kept saying things like, "Mr. Mercer, most buyers take at least a week to think about this." And I remember telling him, "Andy, I've been thinking about this my whole life. I just didn't know it until Tuesday." Closing took 4 days, 4 extremely satisfying days. And the second those papers were signed, I hired every fencing contractor within 40 miles who answered their phone. By Friday morning, trucks were rolling onto the property like we were building a prison compound. 8-foot industrial fencing, reinforced steel gates, motion cameras, concrete barriers, floodlights. Even the workers looked confused. One guy finally asked me, "You expecting a zombie apocalypse out here?" I said, "Worse. Homeowners Association." He laughed for a solid 30 seconds. Monday morning around 9, Celeste arrived. Of course she did. Her Mercedes came flying down the dirt path, so fast it threw gravel into the ditch, and she climbed out already furious before the engine even stopped running. She marched straight toward me while crews welded support posts behind us. "Daniel, what exactly do you think you're doing?" I took a sip of coffee and said, "Improving my property values." She looked at the fencing, then at the gate, then back at me, and I watched the exact moment panic touched her face for the first time, because she finally understood. I was not threatening to close the shortcut anymore. I was actually doing it. "You can't block this road," she snapped. "Residents use it daily." I nodded. "Illegally." Her jaw tightened. "We have established access rights." "No, you have established trespassing habits." Big difference. One of the contractors behind us let out a cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Celeste stepped closer, lowering her voice like we were suddenly negotiating international peace treaties. "Daniel, let's not make this ugly." And there it was. That little shift bullies make when intimidation stops working and they try pretending they were reasonable all along. I leaned against the hood of my truck and said, "You fined me $700 over fence paint while driving illegally across my dead wife's walking trail. So respectfully, Celeste, ugly already happened. For a second, I honestly thought she might slap me. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started making calls right there in front of me. County inspector, sheriff's office, zoning department, probably the damn National Guard for all I know. And one by one, every single person told her the same thing. The permits were legal. The boundaries were legal. The gate was legal. The land was mine. By noon, she looked less like an HOA president and more like somebody realizing the floor beneath them was rotting away. But she still had one card left to play, and unfortunately for her, it turned out to be the dumbest decision she could have made. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of metal crashing outside my bedroom window. And when I looked toward the gate, I saw Celeste standing there with bolt cutters in her hands. For a second, I just stood there in the dark staring through the bedroom window, honestly wondering if I was still half asleep, because there was Celeste Waverly in a cream-colored raincoat at 6:30 in the morning hacking at my steel gate like a suburban lunatic in a true crime documentary. Sparks jumped every time the bolt cutters hit the chain and the floodlights lit her up so clearly it looked like somebody had staged the world's dumbest burglary. Then one of the motion alarms started screaming across the property and she froze. I still remember the look on her face when she realized the cameras were already recording. Not embarrassment, not fear, rage, pure rage. The kind people get when reality finally tells them no. By the time I walked outside holding my coffee mug, she had switched gears completely, trying to act calm while the cut chain hung there beside her like evidence in a courtroom. Daniel, she snapped, this road is critical community infrastructure. You cannot hold an entire neighborhood hostage over some personal grudge. I looked past her at the tire marks cutting through the mud, then at the bolt cutters in her hand. Celeste, most people send emails before committing felonies. That's usually considered polite. She opened her mouth to fire back, but red and blue lights rolled across the trees before she could get the words out. Apparently one of my contractors had already called the sheriff's department the second the alarm triggered. Deputy Collins stepped out of the cruiser, slow and tired-looking, the way country deputies always seem before breakfast. But the moment he saw the damaged chain and the cutters, his whole expression changed. Ma'am, you want to explain this to me? Celeste immediately switched into performance mode. Tears in her voice, hand on her chest. Talking about community welfare, emergency access, neighborhood safety. Watching her was honestly impressive in a horrifying sort of way. She could turn victimhood on faster than a light switch. But then Deputy Collins asked the question that shattered the whole act. Is this your property? Silence. Just birds in the trees and the buzzing of the floodlights. Finally she muttered, no. But Collins nodded slowly. Ma'am, the word but doesn't usually help after trespassing with bolt cutters. I almost laughed into my coffee. Almost. Things moved fast after that. Faster than even I expected. My attorney, Rachel Boone, filed for a restraining order that same afternoon using the security footage. And once the footage became public inside Briar Glen, the walls around Celeste started cracking wide open. People began talking. Apparently, when one bully falls, everybody suddenly remembers their own story. Residents came forward about selective fines, missing HOA funds, fake landscaping invoices, pressure tactics during elections. One older couple claimed Celeste fined them every month for a wheelchair ramp because it hurt neighborhood aesthetics. A single mother got threatened with legal action over a children's swing set, while Celeste's friends ignored rules constantly. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier things became. Turns out the HOA had quietly paid thousands in legal fees trying to create fake access claims over my property, all funded by resident dues. Money people thought was fixing roads and maintaining parks had instead been fueling one woman's obsession with control. Then came the county audit. And Lord, that was the real explosion. Missing reserve funds, fraudulent contractor payments, personal expenses hidden under community maintenance budgets. By then, local news stations were circling Briar Glen like vultures. Every night, there seemed to be another story about corruption, intimidation, or financial misconduct, and somehow my fence ended up becoming the symbol of the whole thing. One reporter called it the gate that broke the HOA. I hated how much I enjoyed hearing that. About 2 months later, the state officially suspended Briar Glen's HOA authority pending criminal investigation. Celeste resigned before they could remove her publicly, though honestly, it made little difference. People in town looked at her differently now. The illusion was gone. And funny enough, once fear disappeared, nobody seemed interested in protecting her anymore. I saw her one final time near the courthouse downtown. No designer blazer. No expensive sunglasses. Just a tired woman sitting alone on a bench staring at the sidewalk while reporters crowded the entrance across the street. She noticed me standing there, and for a second, I thought maybe she was about to apologize. Instead, she said, "You ruined everything over a stupid dirt road." I stood there a while before answering because, truthfully, I had asked myself that same question more than once. Then I said, "No, Celeste, you ruined everything because nobody ever told you the word no before." She looked away after that, and that was it. No dramatic ending. No screaming match. Just silence between two people who had spent months dragging each other through war. These days the land is peaceful again. The gate still stands, though now it stays open most afternoons because the new neighborhood board actually worked with the county to build a legal emergency access lane around the property instead of try to steal one through it. Funny how cooperation works better than arrogance. Sometimes kids from the neighborhood fish down by the creek where Laura used to walk, and every now and then I sit on the porch with coffee watching fireflies blink through the trees thinking about how close I came to simply giving in because it seemed easier. Maybe that would have saved me money. Probably would have saved me stress too. But then I think about what happens when people like Celeste never get challenged. How they keep taking and taking until entire communities start mistaking intimidation for leadership. And honestly, I sleep fine with the choices I made. Still, some folks around here think I went too far. They say buying 50 acres and locking down an entire route was petty, obsessive, even cruel. Maybe they're right. Maybe there's a version of this story where everybody sits down like civilized adults and works things out over coffee instead of lawyers and sheriff deputies. But I never found that version. So now I'm curious what you think. If somebody spent years treating your land like it belonged to them, then tried to punish you the second you pushed back, would you have fought the way I did, or would you have let it go? Let me know down in the comments, because around here people still argue about whether I defended my property or destroyed a neighborhood just to prove a point.